The sun was already beginning to punish the sky when the gates of the San Pedro small-town agricultural center opened. It was an ordinary morning for workers, but a heavy silence hung over the place. Inside an isolated corral, a huge bull of red coat, known as El Bravo, stared at everything with wild and wounded eyes. He had attacked one of the keepers days before, and the order was clear: it would be shot before the end of that week. It was not the first animal to find this fate in that place. However, something in the look of that bull worried the oldest on the farm. It was not pure anger, it was fear, anguish, and a strange melancholy. The animal kept standing away from the group but reacted violently to any attempt to approach. His name was marked in red on the run of executions, and everyone knew it was a matter of hours. On the other side of the fence, some students from the municipal school were coming to a guided tour. It was part of a city hall project to show children the reality of the field. Among them, a boy walked alone, with his eyes low and his small body. He did not hear the screams of his colleagues, nor the sounds of the animals. It was deaf by birth. His name was Lucas, and he had barely noticed by the group of employees preparing the exhibition of the oxen. Lucas did not know why, but when he entered that environment, he felt a weight in his chest. While the others laughed and took pictures, he stood in front of the wooden fence. His eyes found those from the bull, which was still in the corral corner. For a few seconds, it was as if time freezes, two beings, marked by a life of isolation and misunderstanding, exchanging a silent look. The older gate of the farm, his Ramiro, approached the corral with a stick in his hand and vigilant eyes. He had already dealt with many dangerous animals, but confessed to feeling something different in El Bravo. The bull seemed to read intentions, react not only to gestures but to what was behind them. When Ramiro tried to push him with his staff, the animal rose in two paws and kicked the air, making the old retreat scared. The shouts and stroke of the children attracted more employees, and the climate of the educational visit began to deteriorate. The coordinator tried to disperse the students, but Lucas remained motionless, with her eyes fixed in the bull. He did not hear the turmoil but realized the tension. He noticed how everyone moved away from the animal as if he were a monster, and something inside him revolted with it. For the first time in life, he felt like someone. El Bravo kept facing Lucas. Not with fury, but with something deeper. The coordinator pulled him by the arm, but Lucas resisted. With gestures that only he understood, he began to draw signs with his fingers. His face was serene, almost in trance. The bull slowly lowered his head and stepped toward the fence, which even surprised his Ramiro, who knew him as unpredictable and wild. The silence became absolute at that moment. Neither the staff nor the students dared to move. It was then that the bull released a short and powerful lamp, but different from the previous ones. It was not anger, it was a call. Lucas smiled for the first time in months. Something inexplicable had just happened there before all. And even though no one understood, everyone felt that was not normal. In the late afternoon, the decision was sealed: El Bravo would be taken to the slaughter corral the next morning. The director of the center, pressured by complaints from the community and the family of the injured person, saw no other way out. The bull already had a history of aggressive behaviors, and now that he had attacked a man, his death seemed inevitable. The preparations began in silence, as if even the workers carried discomfort with the animal's fate. Lucas, in turn, could not get El Bravo out of his mind. That exchange of glances, that unexpected reaction from the bull, had aroused something deep in him. Arriving home, she spent the night drawing the figure of the animal on loose leaves, as if trying to capture that mysterious connection. His parents, accustomed to his son's silence, did not understand the reason for the excitement, but respected. The next morning, the slaughter corral was isolated. A large metal containment box was positioned next to the truck that would take El Bravo to the final place. His Ramiro, although used to this type of procedure, felt a knot in his stomach. There was something wrong with that. It was as if the animal knew what was to come and yet accepted in silence. He didn't struggle, he didn't attack, he just watched with back eyes. Meanwhile, Lucas escaped from school supervision. He walked fast, his eyes determined, ignoring the coordinator's screams in the background. He knew where they were taking the bull. In his heart, he felt that there was still something he could do, something no one would understand, but he needed to try. Running between the warehouses, he arrived in front of the corral gate. On the other side, El Bravo was waiting for him. Lucas stopped before the rusty iron gate. His chest climbed and descended into quick breaths, but his eyes did not flash. In front of him, El Bravo was surrounded by 3 men who were preparing to guide him to the transport truck. The bull stared at the floor, but as he felt the boy's presence, he lifted his head. Once again, that dense silence took over the environment, as if the simple arrival of Lucas suspended time. None of the men realized their approach immediately. For them, he was just a boy, and worse, a boy who never spoke. Invisible as always at your school, on the streets, even at home. But there, before the bull, Luke was no longer invisible. He walked determined, entered the sideway of the gate without being noticed, and approached the animal a few steps. El Bravo did not move, but his eyes accompanied every inch of that approaching small body. It was then that the unthinkable happened. Lucas lifted his hands and began to communicate with the bull using sign language. His fingers danced in the air with almost mystical delicacy, tracing shapes and feelings. "You are not alone," he signaled, even though he knew the animal could not understand rationally. But there was something beyond the logic there. The bull lowered his head and slowly walked to the boy. He leaned the muzzle in Lucas's hand. The shouts of the men came next, trying to prevent contact. One of them advanced, but stopped seeing the scene. El Bravo does not react with aggressiveness. He was just there, immovable, touching the boy as if he recognized something familiar. Lucas smiled. For the first time in life, he was heard even without sound, without voice. And the most extraordinary thing was that who listened to it, it was a bull. After the initial impact, the men hesitated. None of them could explain what they were witnessing. A bull known for his aggressiveness was still, calm, before a child. And it wasn't any child, it was Lucas, the boy who never spoke, who passed through the school corridors like a figure. But there, at that moment, it was as if he commanded the scene with a silent authority. The school coordinator, who had finally found the boy's whereabouts, ran to the place, furious and desperate. When he arrived, however, he stood. His eyes widened before the unlikely scene. The bull touched Lucas's face with the muzzle, and the boy in silence with tears in his eyes. An employee began to record with his cell phone instinctively, feeling that this moment was bigger than everyone there. More people were clustering around the corral. Workers, teachers, even some residents close to the farm who heard about the killer bull. Tension became an emotion that no one could define clearly. Lucas was still standing there, as if talking to the animal through another language, one that only rejected and forgotten perhaps they could understand. At that moment, a phenomenon was established. Voices that had never been heard began to echo, even without sound. The connection between the boy and the animal was like a mirror for those who wanted to see. People who always went through Lucas without looking at him now couldn't look away. And El Bravo, the bull scheduled to die, was no longer seen as a threat, but as a messenger of something everyone had forgotten: empathy. Lucas was born in a small house on the outskirts of San Pedro, only son of a bricklayer and a seamstress. Birth was difficult, and an infection in the early days of life left irreversible sequelae, total hearing loss. His parents, humble and with few resources, took years until they got a complete diagnosis. When it came, the weight of silence came, the fear of what the world would do with a child who did not hear. At school, the early years were a succession of exclusions and frustrations. With no teachers trained to deal with his condition, Lucas was being set aside. While colleagues learned to read and write, he took refuge in drawings, scribbling leaves with scenes of animals, trees, and mouths without mouth. It was as if his art tried to express everything his voice could not achieve. Solitude became a constant companion. The absence of friends and the distant gaze of the adults made him withdrawn, but not empty. Inside it grew a sensitivity that few noticed. Lucas developed absurd attention to the details, the movement of the leaves, the way people breathed, the shake of the ground as an animal approached. He learned to listen with his eyes. His silence was not lacking, it was another form of language, older, more intuitive. That's why, seeing El Bravo, Lucas was not afraid. He didn't see a monster. He saw what everyone avoided seeing: a hurt, rejected, misunderstood being. A living mirror of itself. And now, in the face of the chance to change the fate of that animal, Lucas felt that he could also change his own. It wouldn't be just the boy no longer heard, it would be the boy who taught the world how to listen to another way. While Lucas still kept his silent connection with El Bravo, a metallic noise echoed through the center. It was Sandro, the official responsible for the executions, arriving with the shoulder-backed precision rifle. He was not a cruel man by nature, but he saw in his work an almost cold technical function. For him, the slaughter was routine and the bull just another number in the record notebook. Seeing the scene, Sandro frowned. "I didn't understand what this boy did there, nor why everyone seemed hesitated." "Let's end this soon," he murmured, already preparing the equipment. His Ramiro tried to intervene, explaining that something strange was happening, that it might be better to wait. But Sandro, pressured by deadlines, orders, and his own emotional hardness, did not hear. "It's an animal, Ramiro. And this is over time." Lucas saw the man with the rifle approaching and felt his heart accelerate. Even without hearing the sounds, he noticed the movement. His eyes jumped from the bull to the weapon. El Bravo, instinctively, was also restless, as if he felt the threat hanging in the air. The moment of peace began to undo. The boy put himself in front of the animal, opening his arms as if his small body could stop the inevitable. Sandro froze. For a moment, I didn't know if it was anger or unbelief what I felt. He shouted, gestured, demanded that someone removed the boy from there. But no one moved. Neither the employees nor the coordinator nor their Ramiro. Everyone seemed paralyzed by something bigger than fear. It was a moral disconcerting. The deaf boy was saying without a single word that he did not kill himself. There he hurt himself. Luke remained firm between the bull and the armed man, his open arms like fragile wings trying to contain a storm. The sweat dripped down his forehead, but his eyes were spiked on Sandro's face. I tried, with gestures and signs, to say something. His hands drew words in the air with despair. However, for the man who wielded the rifle, that was only confusing movement, a meaningless visual noise. The coordinator finally approached, trying to translate what Lucas was saying. But she didn't know the sign language well. He pointed, asked, stumbled upon interpretations. It was as if everyone spoke different languages. And in the midst of that silent babble, the tension grew. El Bravo, still, started to snort. Not of threat, but of restlessness. The bond between him and the boy was being violated, and he felt. His Ramiro, with a more human and attentive gaze, approached slowly and tried another approach. He didn't talk to the boy, he looked at him. Observed the gestures. The expression. He tried to understand by feeling, not by logic. Lucas noticed and began to signal more calmly. Pointed to the bull. Then to the chest itself. And then he gestured a throbbing heart. Ramiro took a few seconds and understood. Lucas was saying, he feels like me. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Sandro lowered the weapon lightly, disconcerted. Ramiro's words echoed through the small group. The boy is saying that this bull feels. He understands. That he is like him. No one answered immediately. They didn't know how to react. But for the first time in that agricultural center, the doubt entered the main door. And it started to overthrow iron walls, wood, and pride. Lucas took a step forward. The bull, attentive to every movement of the boy, accompanied him with his eyes, but did not move. It was calm, as if it understood that there was no danger there. Deliciously, Lucas reached out, leaning against the animal's head. His fingers made a specific gesture which repeated 3 times. It was a sign that he himself invented years ago, meant trust. His Ramiro, still next door, was trying to follow. He asked in a low voice, "Is this sign? Are you asking him to trust you?" Lucas nodded. Ramiro swallowed hard. He has never seen such a delivery in an animal as I saw now on that bull. El Bravo's breath was compassionate, and his eyes seemed softened like those of someone who had just found peace after a long war. On the other side of the fence, more people started to arrive. Someone had shared a video on social networks. In minutes, parents of students, city dwellers, and even a local journalist were there, watching, recording, trying to understand how a boy who was not spoken had been able to stop a condemned bull. The story was faster than any planning. And what was just a school visit became a spectacle of humanity. Between that wild animal and the invisible child, there was now a sign, something that transcended the barriers of language, logic, and even the species. It was as if Lucas had discovered a forgotten frequency of the world. And at that short moment, all there, men, women, adults, and children, could feel what they had never felt. That silence, when born of empathy, can be more powerful than any word. With the audience around the corral increasing and the cell phones pointed out as modern eyes, something unusual happened. An employee, without any order, unlocked the corral gate that gave access to the old stable, a wider and closer space where animals usually rest before slaughter. Ramiro saw the gesture and understood they were trying to gain time, ward off the bull from tension, and perhaps find out what that boy would be able to do. With calm gestures, Ramiro called Lucas and pointed to the stable. The boy understood and began to drive El Bravo, walking beside him like an old friend. The bull followed him. It was not pulled, it was not pushed. Walked. Free. Meek. A bull that up to 2 days before no one dared to approach, now he was guided by a child with small hands and firm look. The audience around arrested the breath. Inside the stable, the environment was darker and damp. Lucas stopped in the center and turned to the bull. Again, it began to signal. His fingers told stories in the air, expressing words such as fear, pain, shelter, and friendship. El Bravo, without understanding the words, understood the intention. He lay on the straw floor, gently with his semi-open eyes as if he had finally found peace. The bull was resting, trusting, surrender. The miracle was not supernatural. There was no heavenly light, no thunder, no divine voices. But for those who witnessed, it was impossible not to be moved. A journalist captured the exact moment when the boy knelt beside the bull and leaned his forehead in his head. The image ran the country. In less than 24 hours, it was in the networks, newspapers, and even international news. And so, in the silence of a stable, a deaf boy changed the world. The video of the boy and the bull had crossed borders before the board of the Agricultural Center could react. In a few hours, hashtags emerged, animal rights activists mobilized, and animal behavior experts began to discuss the scene on the net. It was as if the world had stopped to understand what had happened that muffled morning in San Pedro. But inside the farm, the mood was different, a heavy silence of uncertainty. Sandro, still with the rifle leaning against the wall, walked from side to side, restless. He didn't understand what the boy had done, but he couldn't deny what he saw either. Ramiro, on the other hand, remained sitting near the stable as who watches something sacred. The bull was still lying down, and Lucas, beside him, drew with a stick in the straw small symbols that only he understood. It was as if they were creating a new language right there, before the eyes of the world. The school principal, pressured by the exhibition, quickly arrived at the scene accompanied by a regional reporting team. Seeing Lucas, he tried to approach with a forced smile, but the boy backed away. He knew how to distinguish sincere gestures from theatricals. I didn't want to be an attraction. I wanted to protect El Bravo. Your only friend. The only creature who silently had returned a sense of belonging. And that no one had the right to take. Meanwhile, in the city, families who had never cared of Lucas began to comment on bakeries, schools, and churches. That boy, who would say? He is so silent, but look what he did. Did you see the eyes of that bull? For the first time, Luke's name was said with admiration. But what few knew was that for the boy it didn't matter. What really mattered was that El Bravo now breathed in peace. And this peace was still by a thread. In the city center, the main square became the scene of heated debates. Some applauded Lucas's gesture as a divine proof of animal sensitivity and the emotional intelligence of children. Others, more skeptical and pragmatic, saw the episode as a risk, a passing commotion, a media exaggeration. The father of the wounded, still hospitalized, appeared on TV saying that the bull needed to be sacrificed. Let's not romanticize an animal that almost killed my son, he said with teary eyes. On the farm, the mood also changed. The employees were divided. Some asked to give a second chance to the animal. Others required compliance with the rules. But it was in the eyes that the real revolt was beginning to take shape. Eyes exchanged among colleagues, looks of distrust to Lucas, scared glances for the bull. The centerboard was pressured. Keeping the bull alive would be seen as institutional weakness. Killing him now, however, would be considered cruelty to the world. Luke, not understanding all the words said in the interviews, felt the change in the atmosphere. He realized the way they looked at him, sometimes with worship, sometimes with fear. It was like now a symbol, not a child anymore. But symbols, he had learned early, could be used and then discarded. And that's why, even so young, he became aware of everything. He started to observe who really wanted to help and who just wanted to appear. Inside the stable, El Bravo also seemed to feel this tension. He was more restless, getting up several times at night. Lucas remained close, sleeping right there, his head leaning against the straw and a hand over the animal's neck. At dawn, the bull released a short, deep sick. It was not anger or pain, it was like a request. And Luke understood the danger had not yet passed. And maybe it was closer than ever. The next morning, a black car stopped in front of the farm. He descended, a reporter from a national broadcaster, accompanied by an experienced cameraman and a tense producer. The story of the deaf boy who calmed the condemned bull was already headline, but now would gain quality image, dramatic angle, and inevitably editorial narrative. Brazil wanted to see what had happened. And the media, as always, wanted to shape what would be remembered. Upon entering the stable, the reporter was surprised by the scene. Lucas was sleeping with her head against El Bravo's loin. The bull, immovable, seemed to make a vigil. The cameraman prepared the equipment and started recording. The image was of brutal tenderness. In a few minutes, they decided that it would open the night of the night. The image that moved a country wrote in the caption even before they went back to the base. But something unexpected happened. The cameraman, a man of few gestures, approached his Ramiro as he dismantled the tripod. In a low voice, he said, "This boy reminded me of my brother. It was also deaf. And no one listened to him." Ramiro just nodded. The story, beyond its aesthetic strength, was awakening something deeper, sleeping memories, old wounds, shared pains. It was as if Lucas was not only communicating with the bull, but reopening what many people hid. When the story aired that night, the country stopped. The video showed Lucas, its signs, the bull resting, and the silence that involved everything. There was no dramatic narration, just a soft song in the background. Social networks exploded. Animal defense groups mobilized. Libra's teachers praised the boy's dignity. And on the dark side of the internet, threats emerged. People who accused the commotion of theater, who said that the bull was too dangerous to live. The country was divided. But no one else was indifferent. With the national repercussion of the report, the farm became a pilgrimage point. Cameras, drones, reporters, and onlookers huddled around the surroundings, trying to capture images of Lucas and El Bravo. It was as if that unlikely duo had become a symbol of something that the country could not yet name, a kind of raw hope that sprouted from suffering and silence. But with hope also came the distortions. Lucas, who never liked crowds, felt cornered. I didn't understand why so many people now wanted to touch him, film him, ask questions he couldn't answer. The flashes burst like thunder before their eyes. I was trying to smile, trying to be kind, but I was tired. The bond with El Bravo, who was once intimate and genuine, was beginning to fragment under the weight of the eyes of others. He was becoming an image, no more person. The board of the Agricultural Center took the opportunity to be humanized and summoned a press conference. They said they were reviewing the protocols which respected the sensitivity of the case, who would hear experts before making any decision. But it was evident that they tried to control the public narrative. They wanted to avoid processes, preserve reputations, perhaps even achieving public funding based on positive repercussions. What was at stake now was not just a bull, it was symbolic capital. Meanwhile, El Bravo seemed to feel the difference. He was restless with the sounds of the equipment, the flashes, the smell of the strangers. Lucas began to hold his head more often, trying to reassure him. But there was something that the boy could not contain. The world had arrived. And the world, when it comes suddenly, does not ask for permission. He enters, invades, consumes. And if there is no courage to protect the essentials, he destroys. That same night, while the farm was still surrounded by journalists and curious, a letter arrived at San Pedro Municipal School. It was handwritten on simple paper with firm and emotional handwriting. Who sent her was Professor Marta, retired 2 years ago, who had been Lucas's first educator in childhood. She learned of the story watching the newscast, and since then she couldn't sleep. The school principal was surprised to read the content. It was a public request for forgiveness. Marta wrote about her inability to understand Luke at the time. He told how, in the face of lack of formation and resources, he eventually pushed him to the side of the room, letting him draw while the others learned. He admitted, with tears, that he confused silence with limitation. Today I realized that I didn't teach him. I prevented him from teaching, said an excerpt that made the director silence for minutes. The letter was published on the school's website and soon shared by parents, students, and even by press vehicles. It was rare for someone to take on such deep mistakes. But maybe that's why the letter played so many people. Many readers confessed to seeing their own everyday sins, the people who ignored, the eyes they have deflected, the hasty judgments. Luke, without ever saying a word, was making the world hear stories he himself never told. Professor Marta asked at the end of the letter to let her visit the boy. Not to appear on television, nor to apologize with flowers or speeches, but only to sit next to him and listen. Just listen. She wanted, she said, learning to listen with her eyes, as he always did. And in that simple gesture, without cameras, without stage, was born a second miracle, that of humility. Because sometimes, Mr. Victor, the biggest requests for forgiveness come from those who have already wasted too much time silent. On the second floor of the Agricultural Center, between reports of reports and dusty folders, the chief veterinarian of the institution, Dr. Gustavo Almeida, fired old files in search of a forgotten record. He was a methodical, reserved man who preferred the silence of the stables to meetings with directors. But the commotion around the bull El Bravo had aroused an ancient restlessness in his memory. Something he had filed both in rolls and consciousness. After hours of searching, he found what he was looking for, a transfer report made 3 years earlier. El Bravo was not born there. He had been brought from a property in the interior of Minas Gerais after being rescued from a clandestine breeding man. The document said little, but the terms used left clues: satisfactory physical recovery, recurring traces of aggressiveness, suspected abuse. Dr. Gustavo remembered, then, from the look of the animal when he arrived. Empty, wild, broken. The veterinarian sought his Ramiro and told him what he had discovered. He said that at the time he suggested that the bull be kept away, accompanied by an ethologist and animal behavior expert, but the direction chose to integrate it with common procedures to save money. El Bravo had just been one of so many. And now, seeing the bond that Lucas had created with him, Gustavo realized what no one wanted to admit: that bull was never aggressive by nature. He was broken by human hands before he was even feared. The revelation fell like a silent bomb. Ramiro sat on the wooden bench, thoughtful. The story of the boy and the bull won a new layer. It was not just about empathy. It was also about guilt, about wounds caused by haste, neglect, the merciless logic of a system that treats pain as statistics. Lucas was not only saved El Bravo. He had reopened an unresolved case. And the truth, even when it arrives late, can still save someone. Lucas's father, Antonio, had left home when the boy was only 4 years old. The justification, said without ceremony to his wife, was simple and devastating. I don't know how to raise a child who doesn't hear me. He departed on a rainy night, taking only a small suitcase and leaving behind not only his wife and son, but also the courage to face a world that requires patience. Since then, I never had news. No letters. Not even calls. Nothing. Lucas grew up without understanding the match. He did not hear the screams of the final discussion, but felt the emptiness settle as an eternal echo in the house. From a young age, he drew the figure of a man on his back, always moving away. It was his way of shaping abandonment. His mother, a woman of few words and lots of silences, tried to support the house with sewing and hopeless hopes. He loved his son deeply, but the unconscious mourning of abandonment gradually consumed it. It was only with the emergence of video on television that history reached unsuspected places. Among those who watched the report in a lawn house from the interior of Mato Grosso was a man with a tired look and heated hands. Antonio recognized the boy even before the caption appeared. Paralyzed in front of the screen. The boy he had left small now was there, facing a furious bull, calm like a monk, surrounded by cameras. Something inside him snapped. In the following days, Antonio did not sleep. He called old numbers, sought out his ex-wife's address, tried to find out how to approach without looking like a ghost that comes back only when it suits. But he knew there was no easy way to forgiveness. Still, he decided he would try. Because seeing his son in silence tamed what he, as a father, never had the courage to face. He made that for the first time he was ashamed of his own silence. The commotion that took over the internet now won the streets. In the center of San Pedro, more than 300 people gathered in front of the city with posters, banners, and drums. The main cry was not just for El Bravo's life, but for something deeper. Listen to silence. Say the signs held by children and the elderly, activists and housewives. It was a protest for listening, empathy, breaking the old structures that treated feelings such as weakness. Regional newspapers and cameras of large broadcasters covered the live event. A plastic artist lifted a bull sculpture lying next to a child on cardboard. Libra's students made presentations around the square. Lucas's name echoed in speeches, songs, and even prayers. But among the applause and gestures of affection, there was also tension. Across the square, small groups carried posters that demanded justice to the wounded carrier, security above emotion, and this bull is a threat. The mayor of the city, pressured, called a public hearing. The agricultural center was summoned to attend. The school was questioned by neglect in the child's supervision. Everyone wanted an answer. And the question now was inevitable: what would be done from El Bravo? The decision could no longer be technical. It was political, social, moral. And any false step, both for slaughter and preservation, could cause revolt. As long as all this happened, Lucas watched on television from a small room on the farm. Beside him, El Bravo resonated slowly, as if he also felt the weight of the crowd that spoke for him. The boy did not understand all the words said in the speeches, but his gaze was firm. He knew that the noise outside came from the same place as silence inside him. Both asked for the same thing: life, respect, recognition. The morning after the protest, the small town of San Pedro woke up with another surprise. A caravan of Libra's teachers from various parts of the state arrived in the central square. They were men and women of different ages, bringing tracts written in signs and T-shirts with Lucas's face on the side of an open hand, a universal symbol of visual listening. They came not to confront, but to teach. They turned the square into the open-air classroom. Right there, alongside the bull's cardboard sculpture, they taught the gesture of respect, communication, friendship, and, more important, inner voice. Many people were thrilled to realize that they were facing something larger than an animal's life. They were facing a silent revolution. For the first time, the city began to see the deaf not as deficient, but as bearers of an invisible language, and very rich. On the same day, a group of alumni at school who grew up with Lucas and barely remembered him organized a human stream in front of the farm. One of them, thrilled, told the press, "We studied with him and never hear him. He has been there all the time. And now that the world listens to him, we want to be part of what he created." That was no longer just a story. It was a national mirror. El Bravo, inside, seemed to understand that something was changing. He was calmer, more receptive, as if every new visitor who approached carefully reaffirmed what Lucas had shown him, that he no longer needed to fight. He could simply be. And Lucas, who was still by his side, began to smile more often. Even without hearing the sounds of the voices outside, he felt his vibrations in his chest. And for the first time in life, I didn't feel alone. The City Hall auditorium was crowded. Television cameras, local radios, representatives of the Agricultural Center, lawyers, members of the Animal Protective Society, Libra's teachers, even children's psychologists. Everyone was there to attend the most awaited public hearing in the history of San Pedro. The agenda was clear, to decide the fate of the El Bravo bull and implicitly Luke's. The first to speak was the director of the Agricultural Center. With technical language, he spoke about risks, protocols, animal behavior. He said the institution was following rules and that, despite the repercussion, the security of the community could not be endangered by effective commotion. The speech sounded dry, almost mechanical. Some applauded, others booed. The climate was of increasing tension. The judge of the hearing kept the composure, but sweat dripped by his neck. Then took the word the lawyer of the activists, a young woman with a firm voice and eyes attentive. He showed videos of Lucas with Taurus, spoke about ethology, presented documents about the animal's traumatic past, and recalled, "We are judging a being that was injured, that reacted to fear, and now demonstrates confidence capacity. We are facing a historical chance, saving a life and learning from it." The public arrested his breath at the end of his speech. Finally, Lucas's mother was called. Simple, nervous, holding a notebook where she had written everything she needed to say. But as he closed to the pulpit, he did not read. He just opened the notebook, showed a page with the sign of sun in Libras and said, "My son has never been heard. But now the whole world listens to him. If you kill this bull, they will be killing the only friend who knew how to see his heart." The auditorium silenced. Even the judge looked down. And so, in that austere room, the moral verdict was already released, even if the legal one still took time to arrive. At the bottom of the auditorium, sitting alone in the last row, was Geraldo, Daniel's father, the hand injured by El Bravo weeks earlier. With a head down, wrinkled hands holding an old cap, he listened to each speech with his face immovable. But inside boiled. For him, the public hearing was more than bureaucracy, it was a mourning court. His son was still recovering, with permanent sequelae on his arm. Geraldo had a face for suffering. A name. A memory. Called to the podium, he walked slowly, as one carries a weight that the world does not see. When he took the microphone, the silence was total. Her voice, hoarse and firm, cut the air as a knife. "You talk about love, miracles. But someone here thought about my son? Has anyone seen him lying in a hospital, afraid of never working again?" The pain in his speech was legitimate. There was no theatricality. Only an old man who saw his son to tip over an animal now treated as a hero. He continued, "I understand what this boy did. I saw the video. I cried, I confess. But justice can't just be emotion. This bull almost killed one person. And if tomorrow he attacks again? Who will hold the next victim's hand?" There were murmurs in the audience, but no one dared to interrupt him. What Geraldo said was uncomfortable, yes. But it was necessary. Because compassion that does not see the other side becomes blindness. When he finished, he didn't ask for applause. He just got out of the pulpit and returned to his corner. But before sitting, he looked at Lucas, who was in the corner of the auditorium with his mother. For a second, his eyes crossed. And at that short moment, the old man saw something unexpected. The boy lowered his head, touched his chest with his hand, and signaled. Geraldo did not understand, but felt. It was a gesture of respect, of shared pain, of a boy saying, "I suffer from you too." The impact of the audience reverberated beyond the limits of San Pedro. The next day, one of the country's main news portals stamped the headline, "The Deaf Boy and the Bull Who Learned to Hear." Lucas's image sitting next to El Bravo in the stable began to circulate like a living painting, a modern icon of empathy. A few hours later, publishers, brands, producers, and influencers already discussed who would buy the rights of history. Behavior magazines were considering covers with illustrated bull assemblies next to Lucas, stylized as a small messiah of silence. On social networks, hashtags emerged, thematic filters, digital dolls. The boy, who until a few days ago was unnoticed in the school corridors, was now treated like a living fable, but few people remembered that behind that face, there was still a boy with fears, memories, and a fragile routine that was being devoured. Lucas's mother began receiving attorney calls, invitations for interviews on a national network, until a proposal for inclusion reality show. He was invaded, disoriented. His maternal instinct said that this was running away from control. He tried to protect his son from overexposure, but at the same time he feared to refuse to mean a rare opportunity. How to protect the truth when the world only wants the image? Lucas, in turn, seemed to realize the change. I was silent, not in the body, but in the eyes. Even without listening to the frenzy around him, he felt the different vibration in the air. People now approach not with genuine curiosity, but with cell phones and rehearsed phrases. And the bull? El Bravo had become a symbol. But symbols, Mr. Victor, when distant from the real, are in danger of becoming products. And Luke knew what was between him and the bull was not a spectacle. It was a pact. That night, when the farm lights went out and the gates were finally closed to the public, Lucas sat next to El Bravo as he had done since the first day. The crowd was gone. The spotlight too. There were only the stars and the muffled sound of the bull's breathing, which now slept serene over the straw. With his finger on the floor, the boy began to draw symbols in silence, as if he wrote a letter that only he could read. His mother watched him from afar, hugging his own loneliness. She knew Lucas carried deep, complex feelings, but had never had the tools to penetrate this universe. That night he sat next to him. He looked at her, smiled sweetly, and then pointed to the sky. He signaled that she didn't know. With effort, he took the notebook and wrote, "Do you know what it's like to hear with your heart?" She didn't answer. But for the first time, you understand. In his notebook, Lucas scribbled figures that mixed dream and memory. He on stage, surrounded by people who did not interrupt him. Everyone was silent, but heard him carefully. Beside the bull, neither angry nor domesticated, just present as a faithful friend. In the corner of Folha, he drew the outline of an ear and next to a heart. He didn't want to be famous. No hero. Lucas just wanted to be heard the way he heard the world, in silence with truth. Before bed, he leaned his head on El Bravo's flank and closed his eyes. He dreamed that he spoke to everyone and everyone understood. No voice, no noise, no need for translation. Only pure sense flowing like light wind between trees. And in that dream, Mr. Victor, the whole world was silent to hear him. Days after the public hearing, something surprising began to happen at San Pedro Municipal School. The director, played by the letter of the retired teacher and pressured by the national repercussion, approved the creation of a pound club for the entire community. The first class was given in the courtyard under the shadow of the hose where Lucas used to sit alone. Now dozens of children were gathered there, repeating signs with their hands and eyes. Lucas was invited to participate. Upon arriving, Shy was received with clapping, not beat, but agitated in the air the way the deaf celebrate. He smiled, surprised. For the first time, he saw his colleagues trying to speak his language, not out of obligation, but willingly. Children who once ignored him now looked at him with respect, curiosity, and affection. A younger boy came close, pointed to himself, and made the gesture of friend. Luke responded with a new gesture, soul brother. Gradually, the idea spread. Other schools in the region began to include pounds in their activities. A state deputy proposed the Bravo Project, focused on linguistic inclusion in rural areas, inspired by the history of Lucas and Taurus. Newspapers, previously obsessed with commotion, began to address the theme of deafness in depth. What began as a clamor for compassion now gained body as politics, as structure, as a living language. Meanwhile, on the farm, El Bravo was still in full recovery. Quieter, more confident. Its space has been expanded, now renamed Bravo Refuge, open to monitored visitation. Lucas still visited him every day, but now no longer walked down. He entered with firm steps, knowing that each gesture of his, however small, carried the power to transform. He who was not heard before his own voice now taught a whole world to speak with his hands and hear with his heart. The fame of Lucas and El Bravo exceeded borders. A large international broadcaster proposed an exclusive documentary about the case, with detailed filming of the boy's routine, interviews with experts, and dramatic reconstitutions. The contract was tempting. It offered structure, visibility, even scholarship. But something in the tone of the proposal restlessly Lucas's mother. There were terms like image control, creative script, and editorial freedom. And that lit alerts. In the following days, filming teams began to approach the farm. Drones flew over the stable. Reporters asked Lucas how he felt a hero. But he, who never wanted to be legend, just drew in his notebook and avoided cameras. A producer tried to force him to repeat the moment of the first touch on the bull, saying he needed more emotion for editing. Hearing this, Lucas got up, went to El Bravo, and hugged him with his back to the camera. The scene, which should be the climax of the documentary, has become an ethical impasse. Lucas's mother, now safer, demanded that every filming was subjected to the boys' approval, something that annoyed the producers. At a meeting, an executive even said, "We are trying to tell his story to the world." To what she answered firmly, "But he is told. The world has not stopped to hear." And so, with tears in her eyes, she refused the contract. Lucas noticed his mother's gesture. He did not understand all the words, but understood the gesture, and cried. Not of sadness, but of relief. For the first time, someone had chosen him not for convenience, but for love. That night, the two sat together in the stable. No cameras. Without audience. El Bravo lay next to them. 3 different silences sharing the same floor. And it was at that moment, Mr. Victor, that Lucas found out there is no need to prove anything to the world when the world that matters already recognizes you. On a gray afternoon, while Lucas fed El Bravo with his own hands, an old car stopped before the farm gate. His descended a thin man with a shaken look, simple clothes, and a paste under his arm. It was Antonio, the father who left years ago. No one immediately recognized him, neither the staff nor the curious. But when he asked for Lucas and hesitated to pronounce the name, his Ramiro felt something different, and called the boy's mother. She froze as she saw him. It was long seconds without speech until he, with his voice almost failing, said, "I saw him on television and came." Did not ask for forgiveness immediately. Did not try to justify. He just took an old notebook out of the folder with drawings from when Lucas was small. "He gave me that. I kept it. I never had the courage to look. So far." The mother, with teary eyes, just nodded. He knew that man was still a burden, but he also knew Lucas deserved the chance to decide. They went to pick him up at the stable. Lucas appeared in his straw, dirty clothes, and serene face. Seeing the man, he stopped. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment all the silence of the world seemed to weigh on his shoulders. The father approached slowly, knelt on the floor, and took out a crumpled paper from his pocket. It was an old drawing made by Luke at the age of 5, a bull and a boy holding hands. With his fingers trembling, Antonio made a bad gesture of Libras, sorry. Lucas did not answer. He didn't even throw himself in his father's arms, nor cried. He just approached and leaned his forehead to man as he did with El Bravo. And stayed there. A gesture that said everything. That didn't forget. That didn't erase. But that yet it offered space to start over. His Ramiro, watching from afar, wiped his eyes discreetly. At that moment there was no stage, no headline, no glory. Just a boy giving the world another gesture of healing. The day after the reunion with his father, Lucas woke up before sunrise. The house still slept, but he felt that something needed to be done. He put on his blue blouse, the same one he wore on the school visit weeks before, and walked to the stable. El Bravo was waiting for him, as always. Seeing him, he got up slowly and touched him with his muzzle. The bull, who now recognized the sound of Lucas's presence even without noise, seemed to know that day would be different. Minutes later, Antonio appeared in the stable. He didn't ask for permission, just came in slow steps, not knowing if he would be welcome. Seeing the son next to the animal, he stopped. His eyes trembled with emotion and fear. "Doesn't he hurt me?" he asked low. Lucas just looked at him and made a sign that didn't need translation, "Confi." And then, for the first time, father and son extended their hands together and touched the bull's neck. That's where the hug happened. Not one of those tight, with tears and promises. But the hug that time allows. Antonio knelt down and Lucas, without saying anything, sat next to him. They shoulder. They touched the past. And they let the silence involve them. El Bravo, between the two, lay down too. That unlikely trio, marked by pain, absences and fears, is now united in a gesture that did not need an explanation. It was affection. It was reconciliation. It was presence. Outside, no one watched. There were no cameras, no reporters. Only the smell of straw, the compassionate breath of the animal, and the beating of 3 hearts, one that fled, one that waited, and a third who, even without words, had taught the world to listen with the whole body. And at that moment, Mr. Victor, everything that was impossible was overcome. Not by force, but by the gesture. The sun was born shy in San Pedro, filtering the clouds with the delicacy of those who do not want to interrupt anything. That morning, there were no protests, no headlines, no court decisions. No visitor appeared on the farm. No interviews had been scheduled. No drone flew over the roofs. For the first time in weeks, everything was in silence. And paradoxically, it was the most significant day of all. Lucas woke up calmly. He had coffee with his mother, who sewed unhurriedly in the porch chair. Antonio washed a fence in the back, still insecure, but present. There were no great conversations, no comforting words. But there was a constant presence, what Lucas always sought. Then he went to the stable and found El Bravo sleeping. He sat next to him and drew in the notebook as he did when it all started. For the first time, it didn't draw pain, but landscapes. In the afternoon, his Ramiro prepared a simple snack for everyone. They sat under the hose, the four. There was no need to talk about the past, nor to project the future. They just chewed in silence, sharing the same moment. It was there that Lucas's mother realized the boy was different. More erect in posture, firmer in the eyes. Not because of fame, but because, finally, it belonged somewhere. That day did not enter the newspapers. It did not go viral on the networks. It was not included in any documentary. But it was the day Lucas didn't have to prove anything to anyone. He did not have to save, explain, represent. Just lived. With the father next door. With the mother sewing in peace. With the bull breathing light. And with time, for the first time, in favor. The city of San Pedro decided to hold a symbolic event on the city's soccer field. It was not an ordinary festival, but a celebration of the unlikely as the posters spread across the streets. There were no big attractions, no famous bands. But there was a genuine desire to thank. Thank the boy who spoke without words. To the bull who forgave the men. And the rare chance of a community reviewing before the mirror. In the center of the field, a wood sculpture represented Lucas and El Bravo side by side, with his hands and paws erected towards the sky. School children presented a piece in pounds inspired by history, and a giant track was extended. Listening with the heart is the greatest gift. Lucas's mother cried from start to finish. His new hat Ramiro squeezed hands with the pride of those who knew he witnessed something historical. And Antonio, silent, watched his son with eyes that now said what he once did not have the courage to speak. Lucas took the stage when called. You didn't say I didn't need to. He raised his hands and made the gesture he created the day the bull lay beside him, the sign of mutual trust. The audience responded with silent palms, shaking his arms in the air. In the midst of the public, Geraldo, the father of the injured person, was also present. Seeing the boy, he took his hat out. His pain still existed, but now he shared space with understanding. The event ended without fireworks, but with a moment of rare beauty. Everyone present together made the sign of silence in Libras, and for a minute no one said anything. Not even the children. Not even the politicians. Not even the journalists. A minute of silence, not for death, but for listening. By reverence. For gratitude. And at that moment, Mr. Victor, the unlikely, is no longer exception and became a lesson. Months have passed since that first meeting between the deaf boy and the bull scheduled to die. The city of San Pedro returned to his routine, but something had changed in schools, in the homes, in the eyes. Children began to learn pounds early on. Farmers looked differently at their animals. And even the most skeptical, when they passed the old fence of the agricultural center, they stopped for a few seconds in silence, as who reveres something invisible but eternal. Lucas now studied with specialized accompaniment and produced drawings that thrilled even the hardest. His illustrations had already been exposed in cultural fairs, and in each of them there was an unmistakable trait, the one who sees the world from the inside out. El Bravo continued living in refuge with freedom and dignity. He received school visits, was studied by ethologists, but he still responded specially only to a boy, the one who had listened to him without ever talking. In one of these orange afternoons, Lucas sat with a new notebook before the bull. He designed one last image, the outline of an ear inside a heart, and within it, a small human figure making the gesture of pounds for life. When he finished, he smiled. Not because everything had worked, but because I learned that, despite everything, he had made a difference. Not with shouts. Not with demands. But with a whisper made of look, touch, and tension. And that's how the world has changed. Not all at once. Not by decrees or headlines. But by the whisper of a boy who saw no one heard, until, in a forgotten corral, he leaned his forehead in a bull and said, without sound, everything the world needed to learn, that love, when it is true, speaks all tongues. Even that of silence.